Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of FireDEV, a fireside chat with people in the industry. Today, my guest is Peter Sorgenfrei. Peter, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
How's the weather over, where you are right now? 'Cause it's pretty nice in the UK. It's picked up. It's meant to be like this for about a week, and then we're going to get those, famous British autumns and winters.
Yeah, I having lived in London for 3 years, I remember those. I'm in Copenhagen, and it's 22 degrees Celsius. We're having a true Indian summer here. It's supposed to be like that for the next week, maybe even two. So quite enjoying that.
Okay, that's nice. Yeah, it's meant to be similar here. I don't know if it's going to push to 2 weeks. I feel like it's probably just going to be a 1 week. I remember many Septembers where the weather gets a bit bad, and then suddenly we just get like a nice week, and then suddenly it just turns cold again. So I'm hoping this weekend. Pretty busy with work during the week, but this weekend to be able to enjoy the last of the sun, if it lasts till then.
It's normally like that, isn't it? It turns for the worse on weekends when we can actually enjoy it.
Oh yeah, 100%. Okay, so let's start off with what you do, or even before that, what you've done before. So you've built several companies over the last decade and a half. What sort of companies have you built?
So I started out, my first company was a market research and competitive intelligence company. So kind of like Ipsos or Gallup, those kind of companies today, where we understood what people, customers wanted from the companies that they bought stuff from. So that was the first business, market research, competitive intelligence, corporate strategy kind of work. Then I've had a record label. I've been in the perfume business. I've been in the fashion business. I've had a company that dealt with large data sets. And My last company before I did what I do now was working with autonomous vehicles. So essentially, an operator of large fleets of shared autonomous, so self-driving cars. So that's those are the kinds of companies that I've been involved with.
Okay, so I want to unpack some of that. So the record label, when was that? Was that a company you was part of, or was that one that you founded yourself?
That was one that I founded or co-founded with a music manager. So I was living in New York City at the time, and we both had this idea that we wanted to give power back to the artists and to the people listening to their music, because at the time, this was in the mid 2000s. um, the basically, you didn't have any influence on what happened with your favorite artists, right? You basically could just buy or download their songs. This was just before sort of Spotify really came onto the scene. um, and so we had this idea that we would take a band, and then we would let the listeners have influence on which songs would become the first released single. uh, uh, we would have them influence the album artwork. We would have them participate in deciding where they would go on tour, that kind of thing. Which collaborations they would make. And so we found a band called the Donnas, which was an all-female kind of rock and roll band, and they were into the ideas, and we started having members participate in recording sessions and that kind of thing. So that was the record label that we launched.
Okay, and what happened? With that, is that still something that you're running right now? Did you sell it off? Did you shut it down?
Yeah, so we didn't succeed with that. So it no longer exists, and I think there's many lessons, and we can discuss those. But we eventually decided this is not going to work. We thought that we could get artists to allow people to have input on the creative process, and in hindsight, maybe that was a little bit too naive. Um, and we also discovered, that at the time, again, there were other platforms that started doing something similar, um, that were much more much more well funded than we were, like Indiegogo and places like that. And so we just didn't have the stamina to turn it around and make it succeed. At the time, we were also I was involved in a couple of businesses at that point, and my partner in the record label, he was a manager for some pretty big musical acts already, so his time was split, and so it kind of just petered out, and we put it in the grave.
Okay. And during that time, where was Apple with iTunes? Then how far were they along with that? Because and then also you had services like Kazaa and LimeWire, and then I think Napster had pretty much come and
Yeah.
gone by that point. So there was a lot of obviously not necessarily doing what you was doing, but in the music space, giving access to a lot of fans music in various accessible, cheap to free ways.
Yeah. So this was actually not so much about distribution or it being free or not free. This was more about sort of a co-creation process of musical content between fans and a band. Um, so the thing that maybe put us over the edge was when Kickstarter, that website literally just launched as we were doing this, where other bands would then go out and collect funds from fans to say, if you give us, I don't know, $200, your name will be on the jacket of the CD, because back then we still had CDs, right? Or if you do certain things, commit to certain things, you'll get a signed T-shirt plus tickets for the next show. So that was happening at the time, um, and we didn't have the mechanisms to do crowdfunding in that way. Um, so Apple iTunes was not really a factor. It was more the fact that other actors understood better how to get the crowd to get incentivized and participate and support the acts, and the acts saw that there was a well-oiled machine that could allow them to essentially cash in on their fan base, which we didn't at the time believe in. We thought it was more of a creative collaboration rather than a commercial agreement.
Okay. And what was the main incentive for the artist? Because obviously they want to see something, out of any thing they put effort into. So, what was the main thing? Okay, this is what you could get out of this.
It was that we basically would tie their fans closer to them, right? So at a time where the record labels were making all the money,
Hmm.
the streaming services were starting to make some of the money, and Napster and Kazaa and those guys were making sure that they didn't make any money. Our angle and the artists could essentially become so close with their fan base that they became more loyal to them and wanted to pay for special experiences with their band, or wanted to pay for their music rather than download it for free or listen to a stream owned by some Swedish guy. So that was the motivation for the band to participate. But that, of course, required that we had not hundreds, but thousands of fans on the platform that would support that one particular band. Um, and that was another thing that we grossly underestimated. We thought, if we said, "Hey, you can come and participate in this and get close to your favorite artist," we thought a lot of people would do that, and they just didn't. It didn't matter that much to them. They were fine with just pressing a button and then downloading the music.
Yeah, the convenience, of everything. I feel like what you was trying to do back then. If maybe there weren't services like Napster, Kazaa, and LimeWire that just made it so, regardless of how you felt about the artist, you could get it for free. If that wasn't a thing and it was a matter of still paying, then maybe it would have been like, okay, I can support the artist, maybe get something out of it as well outside of just the music. Like you were saying, get their name or logo once, their cover art or, something along those lines. But we've all, obviously you mentioned Kickstarter, Indiegogo, and there's other service, Patreon as well. There's that one where like donate a cup of coffee while I can't remember the name.
Mhm.
With all these services now, have you ever thought about, okay, this might be the time to redo it, and maybe beyond musicians, and now with just content creators in general, TikTokers, YouTubers, influencers?
I haven't actually. I think, I was just talking about different businesses I've been in. For me, it's been less about the actual idea. I think in my career of building companies. Of course, at the time, I was excited about the idea or the potential, but it's been more about the discipline of building a business. So that's what I enjoy doing. I enjoy taking an idea or taking something where there isn't really much and then bring it to a commercial business that people get enjoyment and benefit out of either working in or buying products and services from. Which is also why I've been in different businesses, right? There's not a red thread here. It's not like I've been, you know, developing engineering products my entire life and gone from airline to airline to airline, for example. This is about the discipline of building companies, and that's what really has been my main interest in all those years.
Okay. And just this particular business idea, was there any technology side of it, and like how was you reaching out to artists, or connecting them, with the fans? What was that sort of side of it? Was there any sort of technology that you was bringing to the market?
Yeah, so in terms of getting the artists, that was through our network. So my business partner essentially was close to a bunch of other artist managers, and of course he had a roster of at the time some significant bands. So that was relatively easy. He would call up people and saying, "Hey, we're doing this thing. Would you want to be on our platform?" Technically, our platform wasn't very sophisticated. It was, it's essentially a two-sided marketplace. We needed to have some. So if you think about school today, for example, right? So like a community platform with the ability to have chats or share documents, vote on stuff, transact financially, have private dialogues versus public dialogues. That's what we built. And actually, as we were doing it, we're like, oh, maybe we should just do this on Facebook, right? But then we quickly realized that doing it on Facebook would not give us the flexibility and the freedom down the line, and they essentially would own the user experience. So we ended up building our own, very simplistically, but sufficient to attract both users and this band.
Okay, and moving on to your other ideas, what were the other ideas again? Record label. What else was it?
Record label, perfume company, fashion company, self-driving cars, and market research agency. And then I had a big data business, I would call it.
Self-driving car. What did you say? Marketing agency.
No, I had a market research agency, my first business.
Market research agency. And what was the last one again? I'm just making some notes so I can ask you some questions.
Yeah, so I'll take them in order.
Yeah.
Market research agency, big data company, perfume business, fashion company, self-driving cars, and the record label, of course.
Okay, so if we start off with the market research company, what made you start that particular one, and sort of extending on to that, what's your background before work? What did you go to university? So what did you do? Is that kind of in marketing?
Yeah. So I went to university for economics. And so I have a master's degree in economics with a focus on game theory and international trade. Um, and before I was graduating, I got an internship with Daimler Chrysler, the car company in Germany. And so I was going to go do that internship, and that internship turned into a full time job, and not in Germany, but in the United States. So in 2000, I end up going to the United States, working in corporate strategy for Daimler Chrysler's what is called a captive finance company. So that's the company that essentially invests Daimler Chrysler's capital from their general operations. So we were financing planes, containers, golf courses, all sorts of things where we figured that Daimler Chrysler could create a return to kind of spread the risk a little bit from the core business. As I'm in the United States, I end up meeting a girl, and she ends up saying, "Well, you need to stay because I can't move to Germany. I was supposed to go back to Germany." And so we end up getting married, and I end up staying in the United States for the subsequent 13 years. Um, but as I was staying, this is a long way of answering your question. I then switched from working at Daimler Chrysler to working at Toyota. And at Toyota, I was the manager for research and planning, which essentially is the in-house market research function for Toyota. So my job there was to inform the executive team in Japan about what happened in the North American market. So that's Mexico, the US, and Canada. And what happened is a lot of things. It was anything from understanding nuclear power plant safety regulations because we wanted to build a factory in places that were near nuclear power plant. And it was to understand, demographic trends. So at the time, more and more Americans were choosing not to have children. So what does that mean for the future of Toyota in this market? Toyota has a very long-term vision. It's like 50 plus years. And so I learned how to do all that stuff at Toyota. And at some point, because I had relationships on Wall Street as part of my job, because Wall Street analysts also worry about, what is the future for a category, what's going to happen. I ended up switching to an investment bank and going to work for them. And as I was there, I very quickly realized I hated it. So I quit. And then is the answer to your question, which is I was wondering, what am I going to do now? I'm living here in the United States. I have an apartment. I need to pay my bills. And because I was young and inexperienced, I thought, what is it that I really like to do? And I realized I really like to understand consumer behavior, understand competitive movement. So what does Ford do when Toyota does this thing? And so I decided, why don't I just call up some people that I've met and say, hey, I'd like to consult for you on 3 topics: consumer research, competitive analysis, and corporate strategy. Because those were kind of the 3 things I'd learned over the subsequent 4 years, the previous 4 years, sorry. And so I did that. And some people said, sure, why don't you come tell us what you think about this topic or that topic? And so I started doing that. And then that became my market research agency because I quite quickly landed some fairly big brands because I had met them in my Toyota or in my Wall Street career and they kind of knew me. And when I showed up and presented my ideas, they figured, why don't we give this guy a shot and he can do the work for us? So that's how that first business started.
Okay, and what was the sort of end point of that, like the exit?
So the end point was after a series of years, a number of years, I ended up going to something called Sinovate, which was a much bigger competitor of mine. And then Sinovate was bought by Ipsos, which is a French global market research company. And I ended up becoming the senior vice president for the strategic partner group, which essentially was a team of specialists who analyzed client data to come up with new product and service ideas for them. So at the time, Unilever was a big client. We did all sorts of market research and analysis for them, but we were tasked with essentially figuring out, is there something we haven't understood in this data? Is there some trends or some ideas that we can leverage to create better products? So that's how it ended up.
Okay, and what was the company after that one again?
So after that one, I then ended up going to London. It's actually one that we haven't mentioned. I guess that's the 6th company, which was called Somewhere. That was a company that existed, and I joined as CEO because They had been struggling for a couple of years, and they thought I could help turn it around. Somewhere was, doesn't exist today, a combination, if you will, of LinkedIn and Instagram. It was essentially a platform that allowed individuals and companies to see behind the curtain what it was like to work at, let's say, American Express, um, through pictures. So employees at American Express in the, let's say, the marketing department would document their day through pictures, and we would then analyze those pictures and match them to people outside of American Express who were applying for jobs in American Express in marketing. This is before GDPR, mind you. Um, so we tried to match individuals and companies based on cultural fit, because we knew that even though American Express gets, I think it's like 250,000 resumes a year, they only hire like 3 or 4 thousand people, and the 3 or 4 thousand people that they hired at the time a year were people who fit culturally. That was much more important than whether or not they were graduates of this university or that university. Um, so in effect, we tried to shorten the recruitment cycle by focusing on the things that we knew mattered most: cultural fit. The best way to see cultural fit was asking people some questions, while at the same time have them visually document what their work life was like. So that was my next company, based out of London.
Okay. And after that, was it self-driving or not? After that one.
Yeah, actually, it was. So in 2016, I ended up moving to Denmark, and in October of that year, uh, we ended up starting a company called Autonomous Mobility, based off a contract that some investors had with an American business that produced 3D printed vehicles that could drive by themselves. So they'd invested in this company, they've gotten the rights to introduce the technology into Europe, and they needed somebody to be the CEO. So I became the founding CEO, got a bank account with some money on it, and was told to try and build a business on that. So that was the next company.
Okay. And got a couple of questions around this. First, so you're founding CEO, and they, like I said, they're giving you some money to try and take this off the ground. Why did they choose you? Or was it a matter of they knew you previously from some of your other businesses or jobs that you had, or they had references, or was it a matter of let's just randomly choose Peter and you got lucky? How
Yeah, no, it is kind of random. So my best friend, who's Danish, his wife's best friend from childhood happened to be the head of HR for one of the companies that these investors owned. And I've always been very interested in cars. I've always, talked a lot about it, thought a lot about it. And so I'm at dinner at his house as we're coming home. And he said, the HR guy said, my investors, they're looking for somebody to lead this initiative. It's a brand new category, industry, so on and so forth. Would you mind taking a meeting with them? And I mean, it was so random. I said, sure, I'll talk to them. That sounds interesting. And then I went and I talked to them, and we quickly realized that what they needed was somebody who could, again, take something where there wasn't anything and try and build a business on it. So I went through the interview process, of course, and I got tested and all these other things. And then they asked me to start the initiative and build the company. So it was quite random that I actually got that.
Okay, fair enough. And so they were what doing or trying to do 3D printed, like what, whole vehicles or just vehicle parts?
Yeah, so it was basically the base of the vehicle, which is called the skateboard, if you will. So the bottom of the vehicle was 3D printed, and then over time they wanted to 3D print the top too. The best way to illustrate what this vehicle looked like a ski lift. So it's kind of like a ski lift on wheels, a glass box with a solid underpinning, and then of course an electric motor, and then wheels and axles. Um, so they had invested in this company. It was called Local Motors. They were based out of Tennessee in the United States, and part of the investment was to acquire the rights to introduce that vehicle and the vehicle system, because when you're operating with self-driving cars, it's not, you cannot just put a car on the road and then expect it to drive by itself. I mean, even Tesla shows you that that's a struggle. Now we have Waymo in the United States and Cruise and other companies, but again, back then you needed to have a bunch of infrastructure improvements around GPS signals, antennae, LiDAR calibration, all sorts of things to make this work. So they had the rights to all that, and they believed, my investors believed, and I agreed, still agree, that over time, cities would limit privately owned and operated vehicles in city centers. Why? Because of congestion, because of pollution, noise, and because it's too dangerous when human drive, because 92% of accidents are caused by a driver who is not either present or impaired or in some way distracted, driving too fast. So taking the human driver out of vehicles made sense and still makes sense. And we can discuss that in detail if you're interested. But um, so yeah, so they had invested in this company, and they said, "What's the business? Can you develop a business against this?" And I started talking to municipalities and cities around the region about their ambitions to reduce personally owned and operated vehicles in and around their city centers. So this was a complement to or supplement to public transit, right? So if you live in the UK, you of course have the big train lines coming in, you have the tube, you have the buses, but those are fairly big form factors. And so there are many places in London where you cannot string a double decker bus through. Um, there are people who need transport in areas that are not most effectively served with either big buses or big trains. Putting in trains is a huge investment. So having these small pods moving around and moving people makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. And so that's what we built.
Okay. And you know, where's the company now? Like, is it still around? Has it been
Yep.
acquired?
No, the company's still around. The technology has evolved, so now they're using a different platform. They're using different vehicles. I'm still a part owner of it, even though I'm no longer the CEO. So it's still going. We also at the time started operating autonomous drones to fly um, supplies and equipment to offshore drilling rigs and to windmill farms. um, and so that's what they do today. They operate fleets of autonomous vehicles, and they operate fleets of autonomous drones for equipment delivery to offshore installations.
Okay, fair enough. And going from that to more modern day, what are you doing now? Are you still jumping around building companies, or is there something else that fills your time? Or are you sitting on a beach somewhere, not right now, or in a beach somewhere usually, and just enjoying the sunrise and sunset?
No, so for the last 4 years, I've been a coach essentially to founders and CEOs of startups and scale ups. And I came to this because in 2019, I essentially stopped working because I got sick and couldn't work anymore. And so as I got healthy, I started thinking about what I want to do next. You know, the only thing I kind of know how to do is start companies, right? I'm not very good at being an employee anymore. Um, but I realized that over the last 15, 20 years, I had missed having somebody to run alongside me as I was building companies, right? Of course, I had a board, I had investors, I may have had co founders, but I kind of missed having somebody who didn't have an agenda, who wasn't my spouse at home, or who wasn't the co-founder, or wasn't the board, but somebody who I could talk to about the ups and downs of building companies. Because a lot of stuff happens when you go from being two guys in a garage to being several hundred people across multiple countries. You need to develop your leadership skills. You need to think about your own role. Am I the right one to lead this initiative? You need to manage the stress, all this stuff. And as I was thinking about that, I wrote 40 founder CEOs around the world on LinkedIn, people who didn't know me. I had no prior relationship with them, but I just wrote them a note saying, hey, I'm thinking about this idea. Does that exist where you are? So I wrote folks in Sydney and Latin America and the rest of Europe. And a bunch of people got back to me and said, it doesn't exist. It sounds like a combination of a therapist, a business strategist, and like a personal advisor. And it sounds amazing. How much is it? And how do we get started? Kind of thing. Those were the messages I got back. So since 2020, I essentially have been doing that full time. I spend most of my days sitting right here, speaking to founder CEOs all over the world. I have clients in 9 countries. And I help them with anything from frailed relationships at home to strategic decisions about which markets to enter, to management of board processes, to developing their soft leadership skills. Whatever is kind of coming up, I try to talk them through and give them exercises and help them solve that.
Okay. So if a CEO is listening to this episode and they're thinking, oh, I might want to hire, Peter, what would they hire you, for? Like, what's the purpose of them hiring you?
To get a calmer, healthier, happier life, right? So if you're the CEO listening to this and everything is great, then I can't help you. But if, for example, your relationship at home is starting to suffer because you're stressed or focused on other things, I can help you. If you're feeling the pressure from your board or your investors and you're not quite sure how to manage that, and you don't feel like you can speak to other people in the business about it, I can help you with that. Um, so people will, my clients say that even after a few weeks, they become, they get more clarity, they're calmer in their demeanor, they're more relaxed, they start sleeping better, all sorts of things that they had before they started building their business.
Okay. And the sort of things that you're coaching your clients, to do, or, perhaps maybe not to do, is this like things they, on some level, know that they, should already be doing, and they just need an expert like yourself to, walk them through it and maybe break it down a little bit? Or is there some more, something more to the source? Is it like a more of a secret source where, most of your clients just aren't thinking about it from this, angle?
No, I think it's the former. I think most people know what to do, they just don't do it. And in some cases they know what to do, but they don't know how to do it. So it's kind of like going to the gym. I can go to the gym and do whatever exercises I'm doing, right? Let's say I'm doing bicep curls. But if I have a personal trainer, each curl is going to be better and more effective because she shows me exactly how to do it, and she kind of forces me to do it in the right way. And that's kind of what I do too. So let me give you an example from today. I'm working with a CEO right now who is struggling with his communication skills. He feels like he is saying A, or he's thinking A, but B is what comes out of his mouth, C is what his team is hearing, and D is what happens afterwards, right? So it's kind of like playing a game of telephone, and he doesn't understand. He can't say, how come I cannot formulate what is in my head in a way so that it's understood by my team, and so they actually do what I am thinking I want them to do? So that's an example, right? So in this instance, I coach him on how to actually get what's in your mind communicate it so clearly that people understand what you actually mean and then get them to do it. People know that, but they don't necessarily know the grips to how to do it, and that's what I to help them with.
Okay. And is there some sort of, accountability, feedback loop that you build into your consultancy? Like, are you checking, up on them? Are they feed looping back to you? Do they have some sort of like check sheet? Like, is there something, or is it a matter of, here's what you need to do, run with it, and they just do it?
No, they don't. If it was that easy, um, I could basically be with people for an hour and they would be fixed, right? So no, it's a continuous process. Essentially, they commit to working with me for a minimum of 3 months.
Okay.
I meet with them face to face on video or in person if I'm in their country once a week for an hour. I give them homework. I follow up with them on WhatsApp or email or phone calls pretty frequently to either remind them or to check in that they're doing the things that we agreed they need to do. Um, I write documents for them specific to their situation. I record meditations for them or visualization exercises. So it's a pretty involved process. And you said accountability. That's another thing, right? It's kind of getting back to the gym. If I have a personal trainer waiting for me at the gym and the agreement is that I needed to do 20 push-ups every day between last session and this session, and I don't do it, I have to go and face that person and say, "Hey, I didn't do my push-ups." And it's the same thing here. I mean, my clients do what I ask them to do because not only are they paying me, but they also want to get the results that comes at the other end, right? Um, so I used to say that working with me is pretty challenging. I'm pretty demanding as a boss. I'm kind, but I do have pretty high expectations of the team and the people that work with me. I do the same thing with my CEO and founder clients. They can't just show up and talk for an hour and go home and feel good. Typically, they've been pushed around a little bit so that they make the changes that they want to make and that they know that they need to make.
Okay. And, you know, how much can somebody expect to pay for this consultancy, with yourself, with the, commitment minimum 3 months?
Yeah, so it's a 3 month commitment, weekly sessions. I'm available 24/7, literally, if they need it. And sometimes they do. And I charge 4,000 euros a month for that. So it's a 12,000 euro investment to get started to work with me.
Okay, so it's 12,000 euros in total. Is that something that you require them to pay up front, or is it on a monthly basis, or at the end? How does it work?
I require them to pay up front, and I have a money back guarantee. So if they at any point don't enjoy the experience or don't think it's effective, I will refund them the entire fee, no questions asked.
Okay. How often have you had to refund it?
Zero.
Zero. How many clients have you, had so far?
37.
37. And that's in over the last 4 years, is it?
Yep.
37 over the last 4 years. Okay. And so, yeah, I mean, if you're up for it, I would, love to, go through like a little exercise, for, my listeners out there that may not be able to afford it yet, just to see, just to kind of showcase what you offer. Is that something that you would be up for?
I can try. The
Yeah.
difficulty thing here is it's all custom to their situation, right? So if we were to do that exercise, we should make some assumptions about where you are and what's going on in your life, and then I can give you some advice. Do you know what I'm
Okay.
saying? So there's not a standard approach. Every single thing I do is completely custom and ad hoc to the situation my client is in.
Okay, that's fine. I'll what I'll do is, I'm going to be even cheekier. I'll put in my, sort of, circumstances.
Yes,
So it's
please.
a real one, and it's not like made up. So the scenario I want to run through is prioritizing tasks. obviously we know, most of us know that, okay, some things are more important than others, and
Mhm.
some things take our attention away from us that we probably shouldn't do. But again, it's about prioritizing those tasks. And there's, I'm sure you've done it yourself and seen other clients where they're busy, but they're not really moving, or they're not
Right.
moving as fast as they could be. So let's start with that. What do you need from me in terms of further information?
Nothing really. The first thing I would tell you is, are all the things that you need to do, all the tasks that you have, are they in the same place and in the same format? And the
Mm,
answer typically is no. The
okay.
answer typically is some of it is in my head, some of it is on a post it note, some of it is in my email, some of it is in my task manager list, right? So the first thing I force people to do is to make sure that if something is something they need to do, it needs to be in one place all together. And just by doing that, you start to prioritize in your mind, because then you look at that list that has 4 or 5 things on it and you realize you may have done some of them, or you may not think that they're important anymore. So there's a natural sorting mechanism that happens there. The second thing I asked him to do is to look at that list and then say, if I have to do just 3 of these items tomorrow, what 3 of these items is it? So essentially, you assign a priority, saying what is important right now, because when there's just an unsorted list, everything seems important and then nothing is important. So I said, you can only do 3 things tomorrow. What 3 things are absolute must do's for tomorrow? The next thing
Okay.
I then do with them and exercises, I said, okay, I'm going to challenge all the things that are on your list now, because I had a CEO, a woman CEO in, well, I should mention the country because I don't want to out her, but she literally had 87 to dos when I met her. She had the same problem. She didn't know which one to attack in which order. And so I looked at the 87 and I essentially challenged every single one of them. I said, why is this on here? Well, because this, that, and the other. Well, it shouldn't be on here if it's a maybe. It should only be on here if there's something that actually needs to be done. So it's just housekeeping. And we took the 87 or 89, whatever it was, down to 20 odd tasks. And then I said, okay, 3 tasks tomorrow. Which 3 are you going to do? Then the next thing is to look at your priorities and say, how do these priorities align with where I want to go, right? Are they strategic priorities or are they tactical priorities? So a tactical priority could be, remember to water the plants, right? It's a task, it needs to be done, it's tactical. A strategic task could be, consider whether we should go into France or Germany as our next market. Those 2 things are very, very different in terms of energy needed and mental capacity required. And so you also have to, within the lists of priorities, decide, is this tactical or is this strategic? Strategic things are not tasks, strategic things are projects. So they get off the list, they get into a different environment, and you assign time and saying, okay, I'm now going to sit down and consider whether or not we're going to go into France or Germany next. I'm going to spend the proper time on that. That should not be on your task list. So those are some of the things that I would start going through with people. There's a bunch of others, but I'm going to stop here in case you have questions or want the clarifications on anything.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of, you know, fed it in there where, you obviously, have priority tasks, like important stuff that, you look at it and you can kind of see that you'll probably move the needle, and it might actually be something more than one day's worth, might need to be broken down, etc., etc. But then you have so many other stuff that you probably need to do as well, kind of, on autopilot, but they need
Mm-hmm.
time as well. So, like, I'll give you, just my example. I would do, school runs. I do school runs. I just dropped my sister off this morning. What was it, like 8:15? Took her there, and got there for about 8:45, and then picked her up as well at about 3 o'clock. I would usually do a nursery school run for my daughter as well. She's just unwell right now, so didn't do that today, but usually I would drop her off about 1 p.m. and pick her up at 6 p.m. as well. So like just stuff like that. There's many other stuff like that that they're just kind of unshakable in the day. Like they're fixed in time. I'm driving a car. There's not that much I can really do. Maybe put on a podcast, for example, to try and be productive during that time. So how do you sort of, when you're making that important tasks list, you put free on there. You've also got other sort of stuff that maybe not might not be top free priority, might not be like sort of autopilot like that fixed time, but stuff like emails or literally I'll just read off what's on my well like a time box sheet, what's on mine. I've got a section called LinkedIn, and in there there's a few things. One, catch up, so just catch up with messages. Next, there's posting and do some promotional posts for FireDEV, for example. I'm actually behind on a couple of these, and then I've got another section. Reach out to some investors for an idea that I'm working on.
But I'm going to stop you right there, Fran, because you're making the mistake of not being specific. What does it mean to catch up on messages? Is that something you're going to spend 2 hours on, or is that something you're going to spend 20 minutes on?
Okay, so right now the way I've sort of put it down on paper, at least in my head, is it means every message has been read and if it needs to be responded to has been responded.
Right. And that's fine if you have 5 messages,
Mm-hmm.
but what happens when you have 50 messages? Are you still going to
Problem
spend
I
are you
sometimes
still
have.
going to Sorry?
And I was saying that's the problem I sometimes have. Sometimes I have a few where, and they're not that sort of intense in terms of energy. I'm like, okay, I've just got to quickly read it. Response, yes, no. Okay, let's do this time. And then, but some of them, sometimes I do have like said 10, 20, maybe more, and maybe because I haven't checked upon it for a couple of days. Yeah, as a result, and it's just become overwhelming now, and they might be a bit, meatier in terms of what I have to do with it.
Yes. And that's exactly what happens. It becomes overwhelming because there's not a clear boundary and restriction on it, right? And then when it becomes overwhelming, most people tend to shy away from it and be like, that's too much. I can't deal with
I
it.
have that
I'll do
problem
it
now as
tomorrow.
well, and then it gets even more overwhelming the next day because you went from
Exactly.
messages
So,
to 25
so,
now, and you're like, that's too long.
so it's a snowball, and then you scramble to get to inbox zero at some point. But the day that you do that, or the days that you do that, other things then suffer,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what's happening is you're essentially reacting to the amount of messages rather than reflecting and responding to the concept of messages. So what I would advise in this situation is to say to yourself, I'm going to spend 20 minutes every day responding to messages on LinkedIn. And if that means that there are periods where people will wait 2, 3, 4 days for me to get to their message, that's just how it's going to be. Because in my priorities of what I want to get done in the 6, 7, 8 hours I'm sitting in front of the computer screen, 20 minutes is what I'm allocating to responding to messages on LinkedIn.
Okay, so
And I think that's just to round it off. It brings up another point, which is people oftentimes say yes to too many things. They say yes to responding to messages. They say to themselves, right? You're basically saying yes to doing all these different activities that you just listed before. When what you should be thinking about is, what am I saying no to? So, for example, if you spend 2 hours responding to LinkedIn messages, you're saying no to other things.
Mhm.
For example, writing a new marketing document, or working on a delivery to somebody that you're developing something for, right? You're saying no to some other activity because you can't do two activities at once. And by understanding what it is, by choosing to spend 2 hours on LinkedIn messages, I'm okay with not finishing the thing I need to develop for my client, or not doing something else. So being conscious of that choice, I think, is something that a lot of people also miss in their day to day. So a lot of the coaching around this, now we're getting super specific, right? But it's essentially just deciding and being cognizant and aware, what choice am I making now? Where am I allocating my time and my attention? Um, you said something before which triggered me a little bit. You said when you were driving in your car, you couldn't necessarily be very effective and do emails at the same time or something like that, right?
Yeah, like most of like pretty much all of these tasks, can't really do whilst I'm driving, and there are pockets of time where I'm doing stuff. It might not be driving, it might be something else. It might be having to attend to the garden, or
Right.
etc. etc. So it's something that may not be intense in mind power, but it's just I can't do anything else really whilst doing
And you
it.
shouldn't be. That was going to be my point. I think many of us make the mistake of trying to do more things than once at once, right? So look at, if you take public transit, what are people doing when they're on a bus or in a train today? They're looking at their phone.
Hmm.
Most people are looking at Instagram and TikTok. Some people might be responding to messages. Some people might be writing documents or something, right? I mean, they could be doing anything. But my point is, sometimes maybe you should just be on the bus. It might actually be more effective to spend the 12 minutes you're sitting on that bus looking out the window and kind of just let your thoughts flow, thinking about your day, thinking about what you need to do, maybe dream of your next vacation, whatever it is, but giving your brain an opportunity to just be a brain and not be a machine that needs to process 25 messages because you need to get back to everybody on LinkedIn.
Hmm.
Um, I think when founders and CEOs really feel the pressure, the best thing they can do is to give their mind, give their mental capacity some more rest. So sleeping at night, meditation, not optimizing every single minute of the day, and learning to be okay with, tending to the garden without responding to messages at the same time or being on a conference call, right?
Yeah, because again, another thing that I do to try and be more effective, and it's probably not being effective, is let's say whilst I'm driving, I get to traffic lights, and I'm like, okay, these traffic lights are long, probably gonna be a minute or two or even 30 seconds. Let me quickly go through two messages or an email, just to kind of reduce it down to when I do sit down and do like dedicated email or messages. There's a couple less, even though I guess in reality, the ones that I probably can quickly and efficiently do at the traffic lights are the ones that I probably can do in a second or two of pure focus anyway. So it's probably not really saving me much time, I guess.
I don't think it is, but also think about the mental load. So let's say you're sitting at the traffic light, you're responding to those two messages. How often does it happen that you either forgot that you responded to those messages and you have to check again later, or that you respond something that you maybe regret because you weren't really in it at that moment? If again, from client conversation, the evidence is true, they say actually that happens quite often. It is much more efficient to take a focused effort, sit down, think carefully about the response, and respond to it than it is to do it while we're driving or while we're cooking or while we're doing something else. I mean, there's plenty of books been written about the power of attention and focus and being present. And I strongly believe that if you just do one thing at a time, that thing will be done better than if you do more than one. And I think for our mental capacity, we need to kind of stack the things we need to do and have room to have breaks, which leads me to another point, which is maybe if you feel compelled to check messages while you're doing yard work or sitting in the car, maybe you're having too many things going on, right? Do you actually have a choice? People like you and I who work for others, uh, we have more choice perhaps, or we feel like we have more choice than somebody who works, in a regular corporate job. But my argument is everybody has a choice. A friend of mine works for a large global logistics company, works a lot, has Teams meetings all day long. And I tell him, I said, well, you do have a choice. You can decide that there's some of these meetings you're not going to participate in. You can tell people, I don't need to be in this meeting. If I need to be in this meeting, please tell me why I need to be there. And when you do that kind of exercise, you'll discover, so anybody who's a corporate warrior listening to this, if you look at your calendar, if you look at your day, and you feel like you have way too many things to do, the question is not, how can I get all these things done? The question is, do I need to be involved in all these activities? And is there maybe 1 or 2 or 30% of this that I actually don't have to participate in? And again, based on my prior work, if I looked at your calendar right now, I could probably identify 10, 20% of activities that actually aren't a priority, that aren't necessary, but that you do for other reasons. Maybe you think it's fun, which is fine. Maybe you do it because you think you have to, which is not fine. You have to ask yourself, why do I feel I have to be in this meeting? And what would happen if I wasn't? And in many cases, we can actually reduce the amount of time people spend on activities by 20, 30%, which then relieves you from feeling compelled to check messages in the car because you've already taken care of that before you left the office.
Okay, and going back to what you was talking about before, listing, everything that you want to do, prioritizing top three, etc., etc., etc. There's like you're saying, there's loads of different books about prioritizing, about time management, several different tools out there. Are there any particular ones that you recommend again and again for your clients? Like I said, right now I'm using like the time box method, been using it for probably a couple of months. I mean, even longer than that in some shape or form, but literally printing out, a sheet of like a proper time box template for probably a couple of months. How would you incorporate calendars and to-do lists? Like, what's your, because again, that's another thing. Sometimes I feel like I'm spending so much time doing this sort of, I guess, kind of planning, stuff. And sometimes it's effective and efficient because it gets stuff done. I don't have to think about trying to remember it. But sometimes I'm like, I've wasted the half an hour that I had, just doing something instead of actually doing something.
Yeah. So again, the first things is your tasks should be in one place.
Yeah.
Whether you use time boxing or Pomodoro or Eisenhower matrix or that matters less actually. What matters mostly is having a discipline about questioning what you're doing. um, I had one client where I essentially suggested that they didn't have a task list, but that they would sit down every afternoon and say, tomorrow I'm going to be doing these 3 things, and write it anew in their physical notebook. They had a paper notebook. So afternoon at 4 o'clock, write down, tomorrow I'm going to do these 3 things. And then when tomorrow had passed, then say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to do these 3 things. And so oftentimes there was carryover, right? They were working on a board presentation or something. But the principle is that if something needs to be done, it'll come back to you. If it's important enough, the subconscious will make sure that it resurfaces to the conscious. Or if somebody needs something from you, if a boss has asked for some document by Friday, he or she will definitely ask for it again if you haven't done it. So it's going to get done. I don't advise this to everybody because it can be a little bit of a risky strategy if you're, depending on where you are in the hierarchy. But for most of my clients who are essentially founder CEOs and kind of run the business, they can allow themselves to do that because they set the agenda, they set the priority.
Okay. So I guess the consistency, prioritizing, the day before, and less the actual method itself, whether it's time box, Pomodoro, or some other you know system as well. And another thing, let's say today, I'm doing some planning for tomorrow, and tomorrow's a new day. How long would you typically expect, you know, any meaningful positive, gets change to occur before you say, okay, it's not working? Because obviously, if I try for 2 days, for example, I'm sure you'll say, you haven't given it enough time for you to adjust and for you to work out the system and for it to work for you. But then likewise, I guess you wouldn't recommend 2 years either.
No, but it's kind of like asking how long is a piece of elastic, right? Because for some people, it's a small adjustment. It kind of immediate clicks and they start doing it and they get results within, let's say, a few weeks. For others, they struggle with it for months because there's something inherently in them or in the situation that they're in that makes it very, very difficult to stick to a new routine or a new habit. A lot of people refer to the fact that a new habit, you need to do it for 67 days for it to stick or something, right? That's been populated in a bunch of business books. And I actually think that's a bunch of baloney. I don't think that's true. And I also believe there's research that supports it, that it takes much longer for a habit to truly become a habit. But how long that is, it depends on what the task is. From my client work, again, there's a 3 month commitment. Typically within 3 weeks is when people play back to me that this new thing that we started in week one, they're starting to do it without thinking about it. Um, but I can't guarantee that for everybody, and it really depends on what it is that we're talking about.
Okay. And at the start of this, conversation about your coaching, you was talking about you was emailing or messaging, CEOs and founders, and just trying to get feedback for this idea of yours. What advice would you give to someone that is looking to cold call or cold message and trying to do some business or get some sort of feedback? Because just emailing someone and saying, this doesn't always get a response. So, what have you found over the years that works from, for that perspective?
Well, I think that's a fairly big question. Fundamentally speaking, you shouldn't ask anybody for anything, right? So we all get these emails saying, "Hey, could you spend 15 minutes reviewing something totally random? That would really be helpful. Thanks." Right? That's not going to work. I think the way I did it and have done it historically is sharing an idea or a concept, explaining why I think it needs to exist. Like, wouldn't it be great if we lived in a world where you didn't have to worry about taking your vitamins, but you were reminded by, a light signal in your bathroom cabinet? I just made that up, right? But I basically describe some scenario of some desired outcomes. And then I would then so you essentially you the way you get responses is by sharing ideas, but not necessarily asking for anything in return. You also have to know your audience. I think cold calling is hard because if you haven't researched your prospect and thoroughly understand that the woman that works at customer service in British Telecom, if it's still called that, her main issue is this thing. Her main issue is it's difficult for her to pull up customer information because of ABC. If I know that about her, and I'm then calling her and I say something along the lines of, I believe it might be difficult for you to pull up this information in your system when you're doing customer service. And I think the reason for that is this. Would you agree? Then she hears that I understand who she is and what she's dealing with. And then she's much more likely to say, yeah, actually, that's true. How did you know that? And then I could say, well, you know, I've been building solutions like this for 50 telecommunications companies around Europe. They all have the same problem. And actually, there's a quite easy fix. Would you mind me sharing what that is? Then it's a completely different conversation than if I call her up and saying, hi, I would like to have a conversation with you about this software that I built that could solve your problem, right? Um, this was a long answer. I think the short answer is understand who you're talking to and don't ask for anything. That's how you get into a dialogue that then allows you later to ask for something.
Okay, I think that side of it makes sense. So where are you taking your coaching business in your what's your plan for the next 5 years? Is it just continue what you're doing, get some more clients, or is it and also on a side question to that, is it just you, or do you have like a couple of other people that are also doing the coaching, with you, or do you plan to expand to that where it is more than just Peter?
No, I don't plan to expand it, actually. I've deliberately designed it in a way that I get to do what I enjoy most, which is helping people. Um, and so I have an assistant, Christina, who helps me with a bunch of sort of general assistance tasks, right? Calendar and scheduling and social media and all sorts of other things because I'm quite active on LinkedIn in particular. Um, but outside of that, I'm the only one who deals with clients and deliver the service, which means my plans for the future is just to do this. I'm not going to scale it to more people. I'm not going to have 50 clients at the same time. Um, I am at a point in my life where I value freedom and flexibility more than money and anything else, really. So I just want to keep working with a select, maybe 10 clients maximum at any given time, and deliver what I believe is the best service to them that I can.
Okay. Now, as somebody who coaches CEOs and founders to, I guess, get more order in their life and their business to become more efficient and ultimately more successful, how do you bring that to your own life? If you're potentially managing 10 different clients at any given time, they're pouring their problems, out to you. Some of them may be real serious problems. It might be on a family level as well, or there might be, like you said, hundreds of employees, and they could be let go in the next 6 months if things don't make a turnaround. So how do you make sure you don't get overwhelmed? Do you have a coach as well? What are you doing? And then linking with that, how are you prioritizing your tasks as well?
So all good questions. Yes, I do have a coach myself around some of the processes in having a business like mine. So more like tactical stuff around social media and selling and that kind of thing. So I work with somebody there. I also have what's called supervision, which essentially is another coach, or a coach and psychologist actually, who talks to me about my clients. So we don't talk specifics about their names or whatever, but I can talk to her about something that I'm hearing in the conversations, and she can help me how to navigate that. There has been instances where my clients are having problems, challenges that I'm not qualified to deal with, right? So substance abuse, um, domestic violence, other things like that. And so in those instances, what I do is I actually find a specialist for them and refer them to that specialist, or even make the appointment so that they go and talk to that specialist. So there's a very clear line that I don't cross in terms of the advice and guidance that I give. Um, how do I manage my time? I try to live what I preach, which is there I only have one task list. It's all happening in Notion. I only touch something once. So if I get an email, if I open that email, I deal with it right then and there. Otherwise, I don't open it. Um, I delegate a bunch of stuff to my assistants, and I automate a bunch of stuff. So my calendar system runs on Calendly. All my calls are recorded and summarized automatically with tasks and to-dos, both for me and for the client. So there's a bunch of technology that allows me to not spend, for each hour I work with a client, I don't spend 5 hours sort of recapping and dealing with coordination of next meeting and that kind of stuff. All that happens more or less automatically.
Okay. And, so you have coaches yourself. I'm sure you've heard of the saying, doctors make terrible patients. So, as somebody who's doing professional coaching and doing it successfully, like, do you ever find it difficult taking, getting advice from another coach? Do you ever feel like that's not how I would have given the advice, or that's not what I would recommend, or do you not have that issue at all?
No, I don't think I have that issue at all. It's kind of like saying that Messi can't learn something from Ronaldo, right? Not that I'm Messi or Ronaldo, but the point is you can still respect and learn from a professional who obviously is better at something than you are. I'm humble enough to know that there's a bunch of things that I'm probably not very good at. So when my coach talks to me about certain things I need to do in the business, sometimes I'm like, duh, I know that, but I'm not doing it. So I have to investigate, why am I not doing it? And then they force me to try things that maybe makes me a little bit uncomfortable, right? Things that I wouldn't naturally do myself. Similar to a soccer coach teaching somebody how to make a pass a new way. Um, so I wouldn't say I don't have that problem, but I do enjoy working with somebody who clearly is better than me at certain things, and then just get as much out of that as I possibly can.
Okay. And you also previously mentioned, about books. What would be your top five books for, either coaching or success or business, time management, like what are some of the, highlights?
So you can't see behind me now, but I have a fairly sizable bookshelf, and I'm looking over at it now just to see what I would recommend, because it's not the same five books at all times. Um, but I always recommend a book called The Art of Racing in the Rain, and it's essentially a novel from a dog's perspective about going for runs with its human in the rain and running in the rain. And I recommend that book because it talks about getting enjoyment out of things that for others seems as a nuisance. But it all is a question of perspective. So it teaches us perspective. Um, then I recommend a book by Bill Bradley, who's the former U.S. Senator, who's also a basketball player. And the book is called A Sense of Where You Are. Um, and it's about playing basketball, but it's a book that teaches us, kind of like Wayne Gretzky said, skating to where the puck is. In basketball, is about making proper passes at the right time to the right person in order for things to work out. And the analogy to business and being a founder CEO is, you know, who am I passing the ball to? And are they able to catch it and work with it and do something with it? Or are they in a position where they can't execute, right? So that would be number two. And now it gets a little more difficult because depending on where the client is, I typically offer Stoic literature. So there's something there. Ryan Holiday has written The Daily Stoic, which is basically a collection of Stoic writings that is easy to read. So I tell people to pick that one up. Um, I also have sort of books that are more often recommended, if you will. Um, One of them is called Never Eat Alone by a guy named Keith Ferrazzi. And the book is about networking. Essentially, how do you meet more people and talk about your thing without them thinking you're annoying and a salesy guy that they don't want to be around? So I recommend that one. And then the last one I will bring up is a fairly new book, which is Tiago Forte's book called Building a Second Brain. And that's a book about organization, what we spoke about with tasks. How do we organize information effectively? We're good at collecting information as humans, but we're not very good at organizing information. Um, and Tiago's book is very good at explaining a way to do that.
Okay, and I mean, I'm loving the list. I've heard of a couple of them. The others I haven't. I've made a note of these, and I'll put the links to these in the show notes as well. So anyone that's listening to this episode can go and check them out. And going back to your coaching. So you're saying you charge 4,000 per month, 12,000, in total. At what sort of level? Would you recommend a CEO even think about, booking coaching with you? Because if they've just started out, they don't really have much money coming in and they haven't got much money from somewhere else, it's probably not the best thing to, hire, I guess, yourself to do coaching if they can't afford it. Because, that little session that we did, I'm already feeling like, okay, tomorrow I can't wait to, attack my task list, but do it slightly differently. Have okay, I'm going to spend X amount of time on a task and tasks. If it's like emails, but it's not a matter of I have to go through every email. So I have to spend uninterrupted quality 30 minutes of time, and I feel like I have an action day, haven't done it for weeks, so I don't know what the results are going to be. But just after a little conversation, I feel like okay, it was useful. I feel like it can be, a positive change, and I can just imagine how over a 3 month period, what it would be like. I'm sitting here thinking, okay, 12,000 for me personally on an honest level, probably a bit too much right now. So, what is that level CEO you would recommend to even consider your services?
So again, it really depends. I agree with you. If you just have an idea and you're going to start to build your company, unless you're independently wealthy, you shouldn't spend your money on me, right? And even if you are, uh, yeah, I could probably help you with some stuff, but it's probably not the best spend of both your time and your money, even if you have it. Typically, my clients are in companies that are 5+ people. The smallest client I had 6 employees. The biggest has 700. So there's a big span there. Most of them are either profitable from operations or are Series A funded, right? So they've basically gotten the investment to start scaling the company. And part of scaling the company typically is going from being, let's say, 15, 20 people to being 100 people. Um, so if you're Series A funded or if you have a profitable operation and you feel like something is missing from your leadership toolkit, or if you feel overwhelmed, or if you feel uncertain and insecure about a bunch of the things that you need to do and you don't feel like you can talk to anybody, that's when you should contact me. There's kind of two groups of clients. One group contacts me when it's almost too late. So basically, the world is falling apart around them and they don't sleep and they're struggling at home and the business is not going well, all sorts of problems. Then they pick up the phone and then they call me and like, please come save me. And it's not that I save them myself, they actually save them themselves, but I help them in the process. And then there's the other group, which is before that, which goes, I can see that over the next couple of months, over the next couple of years, I need to move myself to a different level. I need to go from being a specialist leader to being a generalist leader of many. I need to go from not having professional investors to having professional investors. I've never tried that. I'd like to have somebody along with me for that ride. And then they get in touch with me. So those are kind of the two groups of clients that I see.
Okay, I think again, it helps hearing what your recommended client is, because I speak to so many people on this podcast, and when I speak to someone that's doing something outside of programmer, artist, or something typical, and one of the first hires you would make, for example, and I ask when would you consider hiring you or using your services. A lot of time it is obviously, I guess, they try and sell themselves, as soon as possible, straight away. And I'm like, but if they're like not really making any money, or just enough, it's probably not the best to be hiring your abstract services right now. I guess maybe thinking about it, maybe even do some research themselves. So I'm sure there's some, let's say with your services, I guess there's some resources that people can use for free or very cheap, whether they're books or YouTube videos, to try and get some benefits of coaching without having to hire someone for 12,000 euros. And that leads me on to AI. Are you leveraging AI like ChatGPT, Gemini, etc. in any major form? And would you recommend maybe even using AI as some sort of form of coach? Because versus a YouTube video, you could create a YouTube video, but again, it'll be very fixed scenario. Using AI, I could see maybe it could be a bit more dynamic.
Yeah, so no, I don't leverage AI in a major way. I mean, I leverage it in the operation of my business, but I don't leverage it in the service that I deliver to clients. And maybe it's because I'm not smart enough to do that just yet. But but my whole approach is called the whole human approach, right? That's my framework and my system. And in that lies the ability to really feel and understand the person who's sitting in front of you. And I don't think AI is there just yet. So if you and I were sitting in front of us and I could see you and I could feel you in the space and I could notice how your eyes twitch when you talk about something, or just observe you in that way and know what to ask or what to push for at what point, I don't think AI can do that just yet. Or at least I haven't figured it out or sat down and found some smart people who could do it. So I'm not. And, you know, I think for a world where we increasingly are distant from other humans, in terms of both now you and I talking like this, or there's so much that happens where we're not interacting with people, I feel that the personal coach who's a human is enormously valuable, because you're right, you can get, I mean, everything I talk about I publish on LinkedIn. I don't I don't know if I've done it yet, but I will do it. If you go through my blog on my website, my YouTube channel, the podcast that I have, all my editions of my newsletter, everything I posted on LinkedIn over the last 4 years, you could probably hear all the advice you need to hear to change the situation that you're in. But the reality is, most people don't follow the advice that they get for free, right? Some people do, but most people don't. It is first when you pay somebody to force you to do the push ups that you actually do the push ups. Or when you pay somebody to critique your writing, that you will actually pay attention to how you write. And so there is something there. And that's also, back to my price point. When I started doing this, I did it at a much lower price point. But I realized that people didn't take it as seriously as I took it. It means a lot to me that they actually get better from working with me. But if they're paying me, $500 a month, 500 euros a month, for some clients at least, it was just like, oh, they almost forgot that they paid it. But now that they're paying 4,000 a month, they pay attention, they show up to the meetings prepared, they do what I ask them to do. And the analogy I typically use is, you know, I have a brother-in-law who's a lawyer in real estate. I could ask him to do incorporation documents for my company and a warrant program for my employees, right? He could probably do that. But if I did that, I wouldn't trust it as much. I wouldn't value it as much as if I go to Wilson Sonsini in San Francisco, who has done nothing but this the last 30 years, and they will give me the same documents, but just so much better. And I will pay a lot of money for it. But I also know that these documents will create a safe company and I won't get any surprises later on. So I pay more attention to what they would say. That was a long meandering thought, but my point is, I think people value information that they pay for and therefore respond to it in different ways than free information. At least that's what I've experienced.
Okay. And before we wrap up, today's episode, one thing I always do is like a rapid fire round of sort of fun questions to kind of tone it down. But before we get onto that, is there any last pieces of either advice or something you want to say, especially around the coaching? It could be around something else, but as somebody that's started a lot of businesses, various levels in different industries as well, because you see people that start maybe 4 or 5 businesses, but they're always they're basically the same thing, just renamed. You did perfume, fashion, self-driving cars, marketing agency. I'm guessing there's obviously a lot of overlap, but there's definitely a lot of differences as well. So, any closing, I guess, remarks before we do a rapid fire round and wrap up?
Well, I think I will leave people with two things. One, talk to someone. I mean, if you're struggling, if things are difficult, find somebody who you can talk to about what's going on in your life as you're building a company. And it shouldn't, ideally, it's not a friend or a family member. Ideally, it's somebody who's independent of you, whether it's in your local business association or somebody like me. Talk to someone because you're not alone. Whatever is happening in your life, other people have experienced it, and some people can help you so that it doesn't feel so, you don't feel so isolated and alone with this thing. And the second thing is, as you're building a company and as you're thinking about having a coach, start with thinking deeply about what is it that you want to improve. It is not just about managing your task list. There's something more fundamental that is probably the issue that you want to address and work on. And so whether you should work with a psychologist or whether you should work with a coach like me or whether you should work with another specialist is something you need to find first, because just hiring somebody to work with you makes little sense if you don't know what it's actually the thing that you want to work on. So that would be my second thing. And now you can come with your rapid fire questions.
Yeah. So with the rapid fire round again, it's just always fun questions. First thing, what's your favorite movie?
Shawshank Redemption.
Shawshank Redemption. Okay, classic. What's your favorite? I don't know if you are into them, but what's your favorite video game if you are?
I don't play video games. Sorry.
Okay. Favorite board game?
Golf.
I mean, would you call that? That's not a board game.
There's a ball involved.
No. Sorry, board game. Board game.
Oh, board game. Sorry, I thought you said ball game.
No,
My apologies. So my favorite board game is chess.
Chess. Okay, fair enough. And favorite TV show?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I don't watch a lot of TV, but The Wire, I think, is one that comes to mind.
Another classic. Did you watch it back in the day when it first came out, or when they did the remaster? Have you seen the remaster where they made it 16:9?
I have not seen the remaster. I watched it a couple of years, I think, after it was most popular, because I didn't have HBO before then.
Yeah, Yeah, because I watched it several years later. I watched it when they did the remaster a few years ago, and because initially it aired in that boxy 4:3 format, but it was one of the few shows they actually spent money on it, uh, and they shot it in 16:9. They just happened to crop it to 4:3, so they opened it up, did a bit of editing because I was like on some of the scenes, like camera equipment in the way, for example. But yeah, I got to see it in 16:9, which was a nice experience. So yeah, I mean, if you're looking for something to watch, that might be one to revisit, but like the 16:9 format version.
Yep.
Okay, and what's your favorite thing to do in terms of like downtime? Especially something that kind of relieves some stress. Maybe not takes your mind away fully from work, but I think you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah. There's a bunch of stuff because I'm really good at not working. So, but the first thing that came to mind when you asked that question is watching my son skateboard. I have a 12-year-old. He skateboards all the time. I can sit anywhere and just watch him do that because I'm amazed of the athleticism, his courage, his persistence, and it's just a joy to do. So I can sit and watch that anytime, anywhere.
Okay. Final question, two-parter. Does money buy you happiness, and what does a good life mean to you? And especially considering you've been successful yourself, but coaching people, so you're seeing it from like an outsider's perspective. I'm sure you've coached people that financially on paper they're very successful, but they're still coming to you for advice.
I don't think money buys you happiness, but I think it facilitates an ability to lift your gaze and think about what actually brings you happiness, right? So if you're struggling to make ends meet, it's difficult to realize yourself and look up and say, what is it that I actually want to do in this world? That's a little bit easier if you have money. Secondly, what is a good life? A good life is where you most days wake up and you're excited to be alive and excited to do what you get to do. Whether that's sitting in the woods writing a book, living in a hut, or whether that's living in a penthouse in Manhattan, in New York, working 100 hours a week. Whatever floats your boat, if you get to do that every day and you're mostly happy about it, then that's a good life.
Okay. And where do you think you fall on the scale of a good life? Is it something that you feel like, okay, I'm pretty much there in terms of what I want from a good life, or you feel like there's still a lot of room for improvement? You sound like a very happy guy.
I am better than I've ever been. I have I probably have the perfect life, to be honest. I get to do something that I feel incredibly passionate about. I get to help people, which brings me huge joy. I can make a living doing it. And I have the freedom and flexibility to explore all my other interests in life and be a great dad that's available to my son when he comes home from school and a good partner and all those things. So I really have, if it's a scale from 1 to 10, I would say it's a 9. I think the only thing that's missing is if I get to decide what weather it's going to be. But I don't get to decide that, so that's why it's only a 9 and not a 10.
Uh, you know, before we wrap up, talking about the weather, what do you think of the opinion that if you have so much money, you can decide where you are geographically? So let's say in December in the UK, you're not going to get sun. It's not going to be a sunny day pretty much ever. But if let's say you have loads of money, you could say go over to Dubai, where it's probably 30 degrees. During that time, like. hmm, do you believe in that notion or not?
No, I do believe, but it's not only about money, right? This is a longer answer, but it's about the structure that you set up for yourself. You know, let's say I'm working at Sainsbury's, I'm a cashier there, and my partner is a mechanic down the street at an auto shop. Is it likely for us to say, we don't like the weather, we're going to move to Dubai? Maybe not. But is it possible for us to say, if it matters to us that we live in a warmer climate, what kind of activities could we undertake today to allow us to move to a place in Spain or in Egypt or other places? So you can change your circumstance, but it becomes more and more difficult, of course, if your skill set is not transferable, or if your family structure, for example, my son goes to school. So if I want to be near him, I better be near where his school is. Or we need to decide that he goes to another school. But we have that choice. So to me, it's not really about the financial frame, it's about the mindset frame. You could also move from the UK to Vietnam, much lower cost of living, right? And also warm climate. So I think there's always possibilities, and always an opportunity to make a choice. It may not seem easy, it may not even seem feasible, but there is always a choice we can make in changing our circumstance.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. Yeah. The circumstances that you are in right now, they can be changed. I think obviously the struggle is, taking action, maybe figuring out the action that you should take. Sometimes it's obvious, but then also, understanding the time scale as well. Because obviously, if dieting for one day made you go from fat to skinny, everyone would do it, but that's not the case. If you're at a point where you probably need to diet, then it's probably going to take weeks, months, maybe even years as well. Combined with other changes in your lifestyle.
And that's the thing. And I think you hit it on the head there. Nothing comes quickly.
No, nothing good at least.
Well, could I win the lottery if I played the lottery? Yes. But again, the people who play the lottery and win, hundreds of millions of euro, um, they don't necessarily become happy because they don't know what to do with all this money all of a sudden, right?
No.
So, I think it's I really do think that you can change your circumstance, but you also have to be patient and willing to wait for it to happen.
Yeah, 100%. So, Peter, before we wrap up, where can somebody find you, especially in terms of hiring you? What's the do you have a website, the email address? What's the best way of getting in touch?
So very simple. Google my name, Peter Sorgenfrei. I'm sure it'll be in the show notes.
It will be,
I,
yes. I mean, it'll
I'm
be in the title.
very easy to find because it's not a very common name. So as my grandfather said, behave because people will remember and find you. PeterSorgenfrei.com is my website, and then I would say LinkedIn because I'm there every day writing stuff, and you can get in touch there as well.
Okay, fantastic. So that will be in the show notes. The title of this episode will have Peter's name in there as well, so you can literally grab it from that if you just want to do a quick Google. And Peter, I want to thank you for coming on. I want to thank you for going through all the questions, especially doing that exercise as well. It's given me. I mean, I don't know if you get this from other clients as well. Even though I wasn't a paying client, already feel like a little bit calmer, like a little bit of order has come into my life just from something that I'm gonna try and action. I am gonna, definitely action tomorrow and see how it goes.
I appreciate that. That makes me so happy to hear, and that's the effect I hope to have on people's lives. That once they leave a conversation with me, something has improved in their situation. So glad to hear it.
No, I mean, I'm being, 100% honest there. Okay, thank you for coming on, Peter, and I want to thank everyone else that tuned into this week's episode of FireDEV with Peter Sorgenfrei. Thank you very much, and I'll see everyone next week. Take care. Bye.